Braverman blasts the Met. The Home Secretary launches a scathing attack on the Met Police, accusing them of bias and double standards. We'll explain why.
And Sir Keir Starmer's strife, it won't go away. Tensions build within the Labour Party as more members are expected to quit over his refusal to support a ceasefire in Gaza.
And Boris' bombshell book. Michael Gove, often plotted against the then Prime Minister. A shadowy cabal runs the Tory party, and Boris branded his former top aide Dominic Cummings a nihilist. Just some of the claims made by a former Culture Secretary in a book released this morning.
And binned by the bee, Cara Vorderman has left her BBC radio show after new social media guidelines. She was constantly criticising the Tory party. She says she won't be silenced, but guess what? The BBC's Gary Lineker, he's still there and he's still attacking the government. She's low-hanging fruit, isn't she?
Braverman. Oh, Vorderman. Well, yes.
Easy to get rid of her.
Possibly.
Remember when they took Gary Lineker off air? All those BBC presenters went on strike, effectively.
She's been very controversial. If you don't follow her on social media, she's been making some very inflammatory statements and very much criticising the government. I mean, it certainly wasn't impartial.
No,
in terms of how BBC presenters are supposed to behave. Luckily, we don't have to be impartial. We have our opinions, and you have yours. We want to hear them. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. But first of all, here's the very latest news with Tatiana.
Bev, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Home Secretary has come under fire for accusing the Metropolitan Police of double standards over their decision to allow pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey has called for the Prime Minister to sack Suella Braverman over her claims. The Prime Minister met with the Met Police Commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable if there was any trouble. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has more on this story.
Westminster is reeling from overnight comments from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, saying there was double standards in policing, that football fans are treated differently to supporters of Black Lives Matter and other seen as left-wing movements. Well, I understand that overnight, Number 10 Downing Street did sign off on these remarks from Suella Braverman. So the question today is, does the PM have confidence in his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman? Increasingly, there is tension on the front bench and the back bench about the comments from Suella Braverman. Some say they're in tune with the Tory grassroots, but others on the left of the party are very concerned.
IDF soldiers have uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches when they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Some 80 countries and international organisations will meet in Paris later today to discuss ways of getting humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict, with an additional 163 fatalities in the West Bank. Well, the Foreign Secretary is in Saudi Arabia as part of a diplomatic effort to continue to prevent the Middle East crisis spiralling into wider war. He'll hold high-level talks with regional counterparts in efforts to avoid escalation and work towards a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder over the fatal stabbing of 15-year-old Alfie Lewis. Alfie was attacked in the Horsforth area of Leeds on Tuesday afternoon as children were leaving two nearby schools. The 14-year-old will appear in court, also charged with possession of a knife. Alfie's family say he was one in a million and he had the biggest heart. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It's at 9:34 on Thursday. Now, it is around 48 hours until Armistice Day. And a row has broken out between the government and the Met Police over whether a pro-Palestinian march should be banned. The Met's Commissioner, Mark Rowley, insisted the protests do not meet the threshold for serious disorder.
Well, overnight, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, she's accused the police of double standards in the way they handle protests, where they apply, she says, a softer approach towards left-wing groups like Black Lives Matters. compared to right-wing protests like anti-lockdown demos and football hooligans.
But it's been reported that some within her party are concerned that the comments on the march will inflame tensions and anger.
And you wouldn't believe who's spearheading the pro-Palestinian march?
That's right.
A man called Ben Soffer was working as head of digital, organising for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party until just a few days ago. Funny that.
So quite a lot to digest there, Andrew. We want to hear your thoughts on this at home. But what do you think of Suella Braverman's comments this morning?
She's deliberately provocative, but she's got a point, hasn't she?
I think so. I mean, her argument is what she's done is she's written a comment piece in today's Times newspaper, which in itself is a little bit unusual. MPs commonly do this, of course, but you would normally hope that it would be signed off by number 10, because otherwise it can cause all sorts of trouble. Yeah. Now, you think it has been signed off. But she said the problem for her is that every weekend these protests have got more and more violent. She said these events have been problematic, not just because of the violence around the fringes, but because of the highly offensive content of chants, posters and stickers, and each weekend has been worse than the previous one. But she says that right-wing and nationalist protesters who engage in aggression are rightly met with a stern response, yet pro-Palestinian mobs displaying almost identical behaviour are largely ignored, even when clearly breaking the law.
Well, it's interesting. We've got two very interesting guests here this morning, because we've got Steve Norris, former Tory MP and Minister, and of course, our very own Esther McVey. Ladies first. Esther, Suella.
Well, first of all, you know, of course they write comment pieces, ministers and MPs. It's pertinent, it's very time-specific, and as you say, we think, you know, she got clearance from number 10. But I think the questions you need to ask, and I think there are a couple here. One, is she right? And two, should she have done this in a private way or in a public way like this? So I was looking at when was the last time a march was banned, and it was back in 2011, under Theresa May as Home Secretary, and it was the English Defence League.
Yeah,
so that is a right-wing organisation. So that was stopped because they thought there was serious threat there. So you need to start working out, are we seeing one law for one and one law for the other? Then that would be wrong, because police should be policing without fear or favour. So I think you need to get the facts on that, and that needs to be challenged if there is. But I think secondary is, should she be doing this in private or public? You saw the Prime Minister call Mark Rowley in private to see him to say, look, this is going to be disrespectful. How are you going to police it? What's going to happen? Could there be serious threat? It seems in some way that he must have been reassured that this wasn't going to go out of hand. However, as the days are getting closer, I think we are seeing more things ramping up now. We are seeing people who want to protect the cenotaph, don't think the police are going to be doing a sufficient job. They're going to come out on the street. So what we're seeing could be a highly tense, inflamed situation. And I think they need to keep their eye on that, because I think it could well pass the threshold for serious disorder.
Before we bring Stephen, just finally, do you think she's right, what she's written? Are the police, the people who are in charge of the police, she's not talking about the rank and file cops, is she? Are they biased?
Right. So I think there's two things here. There's one to do with size and bias, right? When it seems to me the protest seems to be so big, it seems now the police are intimidated and cowed, and that's why they're not doing anything. Give them a small protest, even the Sarah Everard one, which they thought they were going to do during lockdown, and they handled that so badly, and it was a small one. They tried to, in some way, contain that, but then you saw the Black Lives Matter one where they didn't. So is it between left and right, or is it about size? They feel intimidated, they feel cowed, where really we should be giving them the confidence they need. Those rank-and-file police who actually, I think, do hold the beliefs we do. I think as they go into senior police officers, they get a bit more politically correct, they get a bit more political, a bit woke, a bit liberal, left-leaning and weaker.
And therefore scared of certain demographics?
Scared of that, but I think it's a size thing.
Right.
Size thing.
Steve,
Okay.
what do you think?
I think Esther summed it up really well, because, you know, for a couple of years now, Mark Rowley and indeed his predecessor have seemed to be, you know, unsure of just how they should treat public demonstration. That's an absolute human right for people to be able to protest and do it publicly in a country like ours, and God knows we would be a much poorer country if we couldn't. But there's been a lot of inconsistency. You know, officers thinking that the right thing for them to do was to, you know, take a knee in a Black Lives Matter protest or whatever. And as Esther says, I mean, I think, you know, the problem actually does go back to the Met. There are two issues, after all, aren't there? One is Suella Braverman and whatever leadership bid she happens to be on and how she wants to handle it.
That's a long bid, isn't it, considering we haven't got an election for at least 6 months.
Deeply boring process as well, if you don't mind me saying so.
Yeah.
But, you know, the fact is that actually, as far as the police are concerned, to some degree, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. Were they to say, we're going to stop it, we're going to ring it, we're going to just, you know, get the Black Mariahs out, invest them in, you know, arrest them in the hundreds, that is going to be very, very difficult to do. On the other hand, if they say, well, look, you're not going actually anywhere near Whitehall, we know perfectly well what the route is, we're going to have, you know, police officers stationed so there is a breakaway group, they think they can contain them, well, then perhaps that's the only solution. I do think, as I say, it's a tough job policing public demonstrations, and we should never forget that.
Yeah.
And the record of the Met, I think, over the last few years, you know, as a kind of Londoner, I have to tell you, has not been great.
Well,
I think everybody knows that.
Public trust in the Met has collapsed.
I think it has, and this is Mark Rowley's massive agenda, as far as I'm concerned. This is his job. He's got to reinstate confidence in the Metropolitan Police, in a sense that they just do their job fairly, whether you're protesting, you know, that we should have, you know, a ceasefire now, or whether you believe that that would be entirely wrong, that's a matter for each of us to make our own minds up on. But, you know, the way they're patrolling these events, I think, that is the real key.
Forgive me for interrupting you, Steve. We just want to expand on this story a little bit. Yvette Cooper has been granted an urgent question this morning to ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on the operational independence of the Met Police. It's currently being discussed in the Commons. We're going to have a little listen.
She's, of course, the Shadow Home Secretary.
Are feeling deeply uneasy at what is going on in the Middle East, but its repercussions domestically as well. We have seen a spike in Islamophobic offences. There have been 21 arrests in the last 4 weeks for Islamophobic offences. We have seen a surge in anti-Semitic offences. There have been 98 arrests for anti-Semitic offences in the last 4 weeks. And I've been contacted this morning by members of the Jewish community who are deeply uneasy about what this weekend will bring. And I don't think it's acceptable that our fellow citizens feel scared or uneasy walking about the streets of London. And it is reasonable for politicians, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and others, I'm sure some on the other side of the House as well, to raise those concerns and make sure that the police are protecting those communities. It is not acceptable to have fear and hatred on our streets. Let that message go out from this House today. In relation to the question about operational independence, yes, of course, the government resolutely backs the question of operational independence, as the Prime Minister made clear yesterday after his meeting with the Commissioner at Number 10. But the Prime Minister also said, after his meeting at Number 10, that he would hold the Commissioner to account, as politicians are supposed to do, as police and crime commissioners do, as the Mayor of London does, as London's PCC, and as we do as members of Parliament. That is perfectly proper and perfectly right. In terms of the approval process with Number 10, I'm afraid I don't have any visibility on that at all. But let's keep in mind that we are seeing a humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. Let's keep in mind there are 200 people being held hostage. Let's bear in mind 1,400 people were slaughtered by terrorists, and members of our own community are feeling scared this weekend. Let's keep that at the front of our mind, not party political point scoring.
Let's talk to Esther McVey. I think she's possibly struck a chord with the public, the Home Secretary. You see Labour are on the warpath, of course.
Yes, look, we're all talking about it. Everybody's concerned about what's going to happen. You know, we're meant to be... It's ironic, isn't it? We're saying those people have the right to protest, but what we're saying is the Home Secretary doesn't have the right to say these things and have a conversation with the public. It seems somewhat ironic. But I think this move here by Yvette Cooper to have this urgent question to put the Home Secretary on the back foot, as it were, I think it's great diversionary tactics, actually, from the problems Keir Starmer's having, because actually he's got his front bench now crumbling. He's got councillors in the country wanting to resign. He's now even got mosques in Preston calling on councillors to sign a letter to call for Sir Keir Starmer to stand down. So this, to me, this urgent question is very much diversionary tactics to what's going on in the Labour Party. This is a major issue for us. You've seen Imran Hussain has stood down. Think of the pressure that will now put on other Labour MPs who've got a big Muslim contingent in their seat.
Well, I think that's why he stood down. He's in Bradford. George Galloway won a by-election in Bradford, anti the Afghanistan wall.
Yeah, you know, what strikes me about all of this is the absolute death of multiculturalism. If we thought multiculturalism was bringing, you know, was building one society, you see some of these clips of the Muslim leaders preaching the divine right of Muslims and the divine obligation of Muslims to, you know, to side against Israel in this dispute. And that's in this country. That's not in Iran or in Qatar or anywhere else. This is in this country. If we think multiculturalism has been, you know, a great achievement in this country, I'm afraid we're wrong. Well, and what we're seeing this particularly, but I absolutely agree with Esther, this is much more a problem for Keir Starmer than it is for the current government.
Interesting. Well, let's now
stay there, you two.
Yeah, speak to former Labour Defence Minister Ivor Kaplan. Morning, Ivor. Is this a bigger problem for Sir Keir Starmer than it is for Rishi Sunak?
No, I don't think so. I think you know, the numbers that we've seen, people resigning or one resignation from the front bench, are pretty small in respect of the actual numbers that we have across the country. And I think that the problem that the Prime Minister is different, of course. But in general terms, Keir Starmer's views on all of this has been right alongside both the government of the United Kingdom and, of course, what is going on in G7 and other countries, where actually people do understand that you can't just give everything back to Hamas by stopping what has happened. What happened on October the 7th was the most disgraceful thing that we have seen since the Second World War. And for that alone, that terrorism needs to be stopped, and stopping it, Israel will. That is within their powers, and I think the Starmer has been spot on this. And yes, some people disagree. That's absolutely fine in the Labour Party, but it doesn't mean that he's got it wrong. He's actually got it right, consistent with what is being said by all around the world.
Ivor, we're going to have to interrupt you because the audio is not very good at the moment, so we're going to go back to the panel in the studio. He's saying it's not a big problem for Labour. It is. A dozen Labour MPs have tabled an amendment to the King's speech next week demanding a ceasefire. I don't remember that happening before.
No, neither do I. And of course, you know, the people who in the Conservative Party who called for the current Prime Minister to resign, you've got to accept there'll be one or two, but we know this is on a different scale.
Yeah.
This is a very, very serious issue for a party that's relied on the Muslim vote historically, assumed that whilst, ironically, people generally of Indian descent have tended to, you know, ultimately vote Conservative, Muslim people from Pakistan, Bangladesh and so on have tended to vote Labour. And this is going to be a key element in the next general election. And you sense that however this resolves in the short term, it's going to have very, very long-term implications for the Labour Party.
30 seats, we think, Esther, possibly. I read about this in the Mail a few days ago. 30 seats where the Muslim vote is 45%. And if they voted
and more going up to
and if they voted as a bloc, if they put up an independent candidate, Labour could lose 30 seats. That could.
And George Galloway's felt emboldened. He's now
talking about running in London
and running another party.
It was a stately procession into number 10 for Keir Starmer. Suddenly, it's not quite so stately.
It isn't, and again, you need to look at what he's done, because he's oscillating, because he's worrying what to do. He had a poppy on, he had a poppy off as he went to different events. I mean, that was deeply embarrassing. Equally, he went in a rush visit to a Cardiff mosque, and that was embarrassing when he left. They felt they'd been used, of which they said, I've told you about the Preston mosques, now wanting councillors to sign to have him resign, and they're going to name which councillors have, which haven't. I think it shows that the Labour Party is full of the Corbynistas that they thought they'd got rid of. And equally, when you talked about that tabling amendment to the King's speech, they've called for a ceasefire I'd like them to ask, or I'd like people to ask, why haven't they also asked for Hamas to surrender? There needs to be an equivalence here. There needs to be, you know, both sides need to stop the ceasefire, stop the war if you're really looking for peace. So I'd say, and I think it needs to be put on the spot on this, Sir Keir Starmer and all those Labour MPs, why haven't you asked for Hamas to surrender?
Good point. And then when you hear these marchers saying from the river to the sea and calling for holy war and jihad, you don't hear them saying that Hamas are a vile terrorist organisation.
Well, they're now calling for a ceasefire to stop innocent people being killed, having apparently forgotten that the whole issue arose when Hamas launched an attack on people in Israel, innocent
there's no equivalence.
and killed 1,500 of them in the most brutal, brutal possible way. No, I think, you know, I'm firmly behind the government's line on this, and I think it's a line that most reasonable people in this country do actually take. So this is a big, big, big problem for Keir Starmer. I think Esther's quite right. The Muslim vote is a key in a huge number of those northern constituencies, particularly, and, you know, the loss of those could be a real game changer in an election that's shaping up to be quite an interesting one.
And it's concentrated in Scotland, for instance. In the Muslim vote is concentrated in 3 Glasgow seats, which Labour are confidently expecting to get. Could be bye-bye to those seats.
Well, you've got to think that Sawa would regard those as seats that he's capable of pulling back, and I think that's going to be really interesting. I think the one thing we kind of draw from this, there are 2 things. One is the whole attitude toward the current crisis, but the second is what this does actually mean for whenever the next election happens, next October, next November, we don't know. I think it's going to have quite a profound effect.
Interesting.
OK, stay there, guys. Thank you. Now, in other news, sort of, the former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries releases her memoir today. It's called The Plot, The Political Assassination of Boris Johnson. She's made several allegations against very high-profile members within the Conservative Party.
She claims Boris Johnson called his former top advisor, Dominic Cummings, a nihilist who he should have sacked sooner, and the now Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, frequently plotted against Johnson and is now prepping Kemi Badenoch for Tory leader. Also, remember, during lockdown, we were all forced to socially distance. Matt Hancock was caught on CCTV having a snog. Well, Dorries alleges that Hancock's security cameras were tampered with before CCTV footage emerged of him kissing an aide. So it's quite a lot of claims to get stuck into here. Esther McVeigh, where should we start? Because we do know that Nadine was devoted to Boris.
Yes, absolutely. It's called The Plot. I think it should be called Lost the Plot. You know, if anybody thinking this is some sort of serious historical tomb, really, it's not going to be. It seems she'd already come to the conclusion and she's worked out the various roles and parts to get to that conclusion. There's also lots of people who are anonymous here, giving quotes in one way or another. So, you know, she's a great fictional writer, and this, I think, will be another fictional piece. But I did actually look. If you remember the expenses scandal back a little while ago, and she'd been writing down on her blog what she'd been doing, and her defence at the time, she said her blog was 70% fiction, and this was her defence for the expense scandal. I rely heavily on poetic licence and frequently replacing one name, event, fact with another. That's what she told the expenses investigation. So she's done exactly the same with this book as she did with her blog. Remember, 70% fiction.
Do you think anyone will buy it, Steve? Will it be a bestseller?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I think I can manage to avoid buying it. Absolutely. Although it could be great fun.
Have you checked the index? You might be in it.
Well, gosh, I'd be really insulted if I wasn't, to be honest. But no, I mean, I think as a kind of, you know, something to read on Christmas Day and keep the fire warm on Boxing Day would be absolutely terrific. But it is, I think Esther summed it up, it's a complete work of fiction. It's nonsense. And it's very sad in a way, because it's pretty clear that Boris did put old Mad Nad onto the peerage list.
Yes.
And that Sunak said, oh, for goodness sake, is there a limit as to how far we have to fall in this sort of listing these days? And took her off. But always told Nadine that actually she was still on. So she entirely blames Sunak and thinks that Boris was a great support. We know that Boris knew perfectly well that she'd been taken off the list, and in typical Boris fashion, didn't have the guts to tell her.
I know.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
Women who trust Boris Johnson, there's quite a lot of them, have probably regretted trusting him. Is that fair?
I think that's a very fair
You can ask his wives and his girlfriends about that, of which I am neither.
We don't have enough time to get through the whole list. And, of course, Boris is
But
coming to
obviously,
this.
look, he does have huge appeal.
Yeah,
That's
he's very
the thing.
popular.
He has huge appeal. He's got great charisma. That's why people liked him. That's why people maybe put up with his failings. But you're quite right. Nadine was absolutely besotted with Boris.
Esther, you are a presenter on GB News now. Before you were an MP, you were also a TV presenter. And I want to ask you about Carol Vorderman being kicked off the BBC for having political opinions on social media, but the same rules not apparently applying to Gary Lineker. What do you make of it?
Well, now, I do know Carol. I worked with her a long time ago, back in Southampton, Meridian TV, and we did a show together. And I have to say, she was very lovely. I was a junior reporter. She was the host of the show. But she seems to have gone on a journey, doesn't she? She seems to have gone from this really lovely household name, have on the telly all the time, to somebody who seems to be very angry. Remember, she was a czar for David Cameron.
She was the
Tory. And I don't know, did she think she was going to get into the House of Lords or something? Has she now changed sides, hoping to get into the House of Lords through a Labour the Labour sort of nomination? Not really sure what's going on there. But, you know, she can't hold those views. Her views have been quite shocking when she's working for the state TV, the BBC.
She works here, fine, but not if you're on the BBC.
Yes, and, you know, she was working for Radio Wales, and they just found that it wasn't conducive with her job. And she chose, I would sooner be some outspoken critic of the government, and she's walked away.
Yeah, you see, that's my take on it. And her statement did say, didn't it, that she won't be silenced, and therefore she would walk away.
Yeah.
I can relate. What do you think, Steve? Oh, we've got to go, Steve. Lovely to see you.
Very good to see you both.
Esther McVeigh, thank you both so much. Don't go anywhere. We've got a lot more to get through this morning. This is Britain's Newsroom on G.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 9th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Braverman blasts the Met, the Home Secretary. She's launched a big attack on the Metropolitan Police. She says they operate double standards when it comes to policing marches and demonstrations.
Sir Keir Starmer's strife. Tensions are building within the Labour Party as more members are expected to quit over their leader's position on a ceasefire in Gaza.
And how much does it cost to protect the royal family? Judges will decide whether we are entitled to be told just how much it costs. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker will have more.
The Guardian argues a secret security bill prevents the public knowing the true cost of the monarchy, but the government says that public interest does not outweigh preventing information getting into the hands of would-be attackers. The tribunal continues here this morning.
And binned by the Beeb, Carol Vorderman has left her BBC radio show over the broadcaster's new social media guidelines. Carol says that she won't be silenced online, whilst the BBC's Gary Lineker seemingly continues with his political posts. Is that a double standard?
I think it is, I'm afraid. She's low-hanging fruit. She's got a show on Radio Wales. It's a very good station, Radio Wales, but will have a very small listening figures compared to Gary Lineker, who's paid, what, £1.5 million or something? The highest-paid bloke on the BBC, highest-paid person on the BBC, and he can carry on. Remember when they took him off air over the tweet about the government's immigration policy? Other BBC presenters withdrew their services. They put him back on.
We will dig out some of Carol Vorderman's more controversial tweets so you can see the kind of thing that she was saying that got her defenestrated, shall we say, from the BBC. We're not quite sure the detail of it. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. First, though, here is Tatiana Sanchez with the news.
Thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Shadow Home Secretary says Suella Braverman's encouraging extremists with the comments she published in an article in The Times. The Home Secretary is accusing the Metropolitan Police of double standards over their decision to allow pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey has called for the Prime Minister to sack Braverman over her claims. Rishi Sunak met with the Met Police Commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable if there was trouble. Yvette Cooper has called for Ms Braverman to make a statement.
She is deliberately inflaming community tensions in the most dangerous of ways. She is encouraging extremists on all sides, attacking the police when she should be backing them. It is highly irresponsible and dangerous, and no other Home Secretary would ever have done this.
GB News understands Downing Street signed off on the Home Secretary's comments in the article in The Times. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has more.
Westminster is reeling from overnight comments from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, saying there was double standards in policing, that football fans are treated differently to supporters of Black Lives Matter and other seen as left-wing movements. Well, I understand that overnight, Number 10 Downing Street did sign off on these remarks from Suella Braverman. So the question today is, does the PM have confidence in his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman? Increasingly, there is tension on the front bench and the back bench about the comments from Suella Braverman. Some will say they're in tune with the Tory grassroots, but others on the left of the party are very concerned.
Right, over to the Middle East conflict now, and IDF soldiers uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches when they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Some 80 countries and international organisations will meet in Paris later today to discuss ways of getting humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict, with an additional 163 fatalities in the West Bank. The Foreign Secretary is in Saudi Arabia as part of a diplomatic effort to continue to prevent the Middle East crisis spiralling into wider war. He'll hold high-level talks with regional counterparts in efforts to avoid escalation and work towards a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. Back in the UK, a 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder over the fatal stabbing of 15-year-old Alfie Lewis. Alfie was attacked in the Horsforth area of Leeds on Tuesday afternoon as children were leaving two nearby schools. The 14-year-old will appear in court, also charged with possession of a knife. Alfie's family say he was 1 in a million and had the biggest heart. Dame Priti Patel will give evidence at the COVID inquiry today. The former Home Secretary is likely to face questions about her approach to controlling the border and policing of lockdown rules. Dame Priti lobbied for stricter border controls in the early stages of the pandemic in an attempt to prevent the virus reaching the UK, but was overruled. Now, an independent inquiry into a Channel crossing tragedy where at least 27 people died has been launched. The incident happened after an inflatable migrant boat capsized back in November 2021. An investigation will now take place into the circumstances surrounding the deaths, which included a pregnant woman and 3 children. It follows the publication of a report by the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, which found the boat was wholly unsuitable and ill-equipped. New rules have been unveiled to protect children online, including limiting direct messages and removing them from suggested friends lists. It's part of Ofcom's Code of Practice under the Online Safety Act, which was signed into law a week ago. The largest platforms will be required to put measures in place, including blocking children from being a suggested friend and blocking people outside children's agreed connections from direct messages. It focuses on illegal material such as grooming content, fraud and child sexual abuse. Finally, the Transport Secretary says Britain will lead the world in the development of self-driving cars. Mark Harper went on a ride himself in a self-driving car, being tested by an automated driving company. It's after an automated vehicles bill to create a set of laws for using self-driving vehicles was included in the King's speech. The legislation will ensure there's clear legal liability over who is responsible during crashes involving the vehicles. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. Thank you for getting in touch this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address.
And gosh, you're really getting in touch in your droves about Suella Braverman. Paul says Suella Braverman can win the next general election. Rishi Sunak can't. And John says Rishi Sunak can't sack Suella Braverman because she'd be going for his job. Well, she's going for it now.
Dan has said, I'm struggling to get mine up actually this morning, Andrew. There's always a tech issue here somewhere. We need a young person to help us. Dan has said Tories picked the wrong person for PM. If they'd picked Suella Braverman, they may have stood half a chance of winning the next general election. And funny enough, we were just discussing that in the break about whether she is sufficiently popular to ever be Conservative leader.
I think a lot of Tories look at Rishi Sunak and think, is he really Tory? Where are his Tory principles? I mean, I think he is a Tory, but he doesn't perhaps articulate his Tory philosophy in the way she does. I mean, you're in no doubt about her. She's a hardline Tory.
She is. And actually, you know, the phrase that she said this week about for some people being homeless is a lifestyle choice caused absolute consternation, particularly across the left-wing media. She sort of had a point. And what I mean by that is I've heard some homeless charity organisers be asked, is she right? And they said, in some instances, the minority of cases, there are people who have lived on the streets for many years and don't want a traditional house over their head.
There's a very nice chap near Green Park Station, by Green Park in central London, and I talk to him often, and he's there in his sleeping bag with his sign, and people give him money. And I said, what about when it's raining and it's got... This is my home, he said.
Exactly.
And he's obviously got issues, but he does not want to be in a hostel.
No, and I think what she probably should have said is that the vast majority of people sleeping rough do not want to be there. I mean, it kind of got flipped and was sounded very clumsy.
And of course, we know a lot of them, and we think about it this weekend, Armistice Day on Saturday and Remembrance Sunday, a lot of them are ex-servicemen and women.
Absolutely.
Who have all sorts of mental health issues, post-traumatic stress, those sort of issues. And I think we've got a minister who looks after veterans, Johnny Mercer, and it's very, very sad to think of so many on the streets. Let's get some more emails coming about the march. Max says, I don't think the right to protest on the streets is a human right, especially when it affects so many others.
And also, Mel has said this weekend's planned march is not just about the march itself. The vets will be attending commemoration events all over London this weekend, not just the Cenotaph on Sunday, with up to 1 million people planned to attend. Using all the tubes, the potential for violence is there for all to see. We really hope not. What I don't want is for any police officers to be hurt dealing with this. That's really important. In her piece in the Times today, the Home Secretary does say if the march goes ahead this weekend, the public will expect to see an assertive and proactive approach to any displays of hate, breaches of conditions and general disorder.
And obviously we want it all to be peaceful, but I made the point yesterday, and the Prime Minister said it, didn't he? If anything does kick off, I think that the Chief Constable, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, would be in big trouble. Right, let us know your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com. So, Suella Braverman has used Northern Ireland as a point of comparison as she characterised pro-Palestinian demonstrations planned for the UK on Armistice Day as hate marches. Home Secretary characterised alleged reports that organisers of Saturday march were linked to Hamas as disturbingly reminiscent of Ulster.
So joining us now is GB News presenter and former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster. Good morning, Arlene. Lovely to see you, as always. Is she right, do you think, that this is disturbingly reminiscent of Ulster?
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you both. I think there's a lot of pearl clutching going on about her reference point. She's made it clear since, and I think she could have been clearer in the article, let's be honest about that, but she has said and let it be known that she was referring to dissident Republicans, and of course dissident Republicans, when they march, are very clearly on a hate march because they want to get rid of people like me who are British living in Northern Ireland. So if she had been clearer in relation to that, I think it would have been more helpful. But I do think there's an overreaction to what Suella had to say, not just in relation to Northern Ireland, but of course in relation to the policing of the parade, which is happening on Saturday.
What about in Belfast, Eileen? Are they having a big? Is there a big pro-Palestine march on Saturday or Sunday?
Well, there's certainly a planned pro-Palestine march on Saturday, and I have to say I am very concerned about it because it's not only happening at the City Hall, where our war memorial is currently placed, but it's also taking place at 11 o'clock. So it's taking place at the time of armistice beside the war memorial, and I would be concerned in relation to that. Last week they had a large pro-Palestine march. They went to the US consulate in Belfast. And this week they're deciding to go to City Hall, and you have to ask the question, why City Hall? Why could you not go somewhere else? But they're very clearly targeting armistice, and that's why they're having the march at 11 o'clock.
And Armistice Day, we think, should be sacred, but you know better than anybody, Arlene, what happened in Northern Ireland at Enniskillen back in 1987. Was it 11 people killed, dozens injured when the IRA set off bombs as people were paying their respects to the fallen?
Well, yes, it's always a very sombre day in Northern Ireland, and particularly in Enniskillen, when we're always drawn back to 1987, when that horrendous action took place. And therefore, for us, it's a very special day. And I think the fact that pro-Palestinian marches are having their parade in Belfast beside the war memorial at 11 o'clock on Armistice Day is actually being very provocative. They could have had the parade in the afternoon, they could have had it in a different place, but they've decided to have it at that place at that particular point in time.
Has the Chief Constable there been under pressure to intervene to stop it, or at least persuade them to move it to a different time, Arlene?
Well, we, of course, in Northern Ireland have a Parades Commission. They deal with these sorts of events and they will make recommendations around that. But let's be honest, I hear people talking about politics and policing. I mean, Sadiq Khan apparently was on criticising the Home Secretary this morning about political policing. This is a man who so intervened with the last Chief Constable in London that she left her job and felt intimidated as a result of it. So let's be, you know, even-handed in relation to all of this. What Suella Braverman is saying is that she wants the Chief Constable to be even-handed at the weekend. I don't think that's an outrageous thing to say. I think that is absolutely what we want to see happening. And like one of your email respondents, I have to say, I am concerned not just about the parade, but actually people, veterans travelling around London on Saturday and on Sunday, because people will be using the tubes and there needs to be police presence on the tubes and indeed on the streets of London in a very visible way.
OK, all right, thank you, Arlene, thanks so much. It's really interesting, isn't it? What Suella Braverman has basically said in this article, she says right-wing protesters who engage in aggression are rightly met with a stern response, yet pro-Palestinian mobs displaying almost identical behaviour are largely ignored, even when clearly breaking the law. She calls it a double standard. How fascinating that she's got Number 10 to sign off on this as an article.
But this often, but what the Prime Minister does, he uses her as his attack dog, and she gets the flak, or she gets to brick back the praise, and he stays above the fray. It's not. They often do it.
A bit like you and me.
He often. I don't have to sign you off. Sign you off. Sign you off.
I might sign myself off on sick at the moment.
But I think, you know, you and I don't agree about the march. I do not like banning, and I really thought the organisers should have done the decent thing and cancelled it and moved it to a different time. I hate the fact that older veterans will not come into central London on Saturday because they fear the march could prevent them marking
enjoying the
11,
weekend
11,
peacefully
11.
and absolutely. I might change my opinion on Monday morning. You'll have to watch next week to see if I feel differently by next week. But anyway, right, change of gear.
Yeah. Cara Vorderman has quit, but I think she was pushed from her weekly BBC Radio Wales show because of her attacks on the Tories.
That's right. She said she will not be silenced by the corporation's new social media guidelines,
which have been updated recently after high-profile people like Gary Lineker attacked the government. And guess what? He's still there.
Well, Carol is, of course, well known for her critical tweets about the government. Let's have a look at a couple of them. Here we go. She says, Johnny Mercer and his wife are the most petulant, childish pair of the week. A minister tweeting out vomit emojis, not knowing basic political facts on BBC Question Time. Now he's switched off replies on Twitter. He gets paid £110,000 plus pays her £45,000 on top, yet criticises the military use of food banks. Ooh!
Yeah, and she says also the Tory government has now lost around half of those who voted for them in 2019. Why? Because they're a lying bunch of greedy, corrupt, destructive, hateful, divisive, gaslighting crooks. No need for a focus group soon. I'll just tell you the same. How could she carry on?
I do hope somebody clips that and don't make it clear that Andrew Pearce is quoting Carol Vorderman there, because to hear those words coming out of your mouth, Story Boy, was quite something.
That was what a so-called BBC impartial presenter said about the Tories. She also said that Suella Braverman is the worst word. There are many, many more.
Yeah, there are. So let's speak to former BBC correspondent Michael Cole. Good morning, Michael. You have worked for this institution. How different was it when you were there in terms of what you could and couldn't say publicly, and have they gone too far now?
Very good question. Good morning to you both. The first question must be, who knew she had a programme on BBC Wales? I did. I worked for them from time to time. Did the people of Wales know? So if the purpose was to advertise the fact that she is on BBC Wales, not BBC Wales, well, that's succeeded. Now, I worked for the BBC for more than 20 years. That's a business existence. If you're on television, it's the most tremendous privilege to be able to address the nation. And when I was there, it was quite simple. I filed literally thousands of stories. I never once expressed a personal opinion, and I covered 6 general elections. Of course I had opinions. I expressed them at the ballot box. When you were in the BBC, you were not allowed to stand for an elective office above the level of parish councillor. And that was a good thing, because impartiality was important, particularly for the national broadcaster. And when I see this happening, I deplore it. I really do deplore it. And with regard to Gary Lineker, who's the most prominent case in this particular story, I mean, he was an articulate footballer. He was probably a good goal hanger. The BBC made him. They took time to create what is now the highest paid person in the BBC, and there are 22,000 people on whatever the sum of money is. It's a huge sum of money. The BBC used to create stars. It can do it again. It should never be in thrall to any single person, or its purpose is finished.
And interesting you say that, Michael, because, of course, you will recall they took him off, Lineker, off of Match of the Day, a programme I only watched when he wasn't on doing the commentary because I wanted to see how well it performed. A lot of other BBC presenters then downed tools that they effectively went on strike. The BBC panicked and put him back on air. That's because he has that sort of power. And you're right, the BBC he completely dictated to the BBC in a way that Cara Vorderman simply hasn't got the clout to do it.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, those other former footballers who were also on these programmes, they really couldn't do it. They had to suck up to him. Whatever they thought about what he would say, they had to do it or else they would have looked rather bad. But you're absolutely right. It's a case of being pusillanimous. The BBC hasn't got the guts. They could go out and find any number of people to fill that role if they saw it through, but they weren't prepared to stick it out and do that. And I think in any organisation, you know, isn't that the first rule of football? Nobody's more important than the team. It's the team that's important, and it's the integrity of the organisation. And if that is ever compromised by this person or that person sounding off their personal views, I think it diminishes the whole purpose of having a public service broadcaster.
OK, thank you, Michael. Always good, as usual. Michael Cole there. Now, up next, are babies the key to saving our economy? The Conservative MP Miriam Cates thinks so, and she will be with us shortly. She did this interview on BBC yesterday, and the BBC made a total hash of it. We will hopefully do it differently. This is GB News. We do things differently. Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
.25, it's Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So the UK fertility rate has fallen to a new low, and there are warnings from a Conservative MP that if fertility rates don't rise, we're going to face economic stagnation.
And that MP is with us now, the Tory MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge, Miriam Cates. Miriam, morning to you. Isn't the country already overcrowded? No room in our schools, no houses. Don't we need the birth rate to fall a bit?
Well, there is certainly pressure on our public services and pressure on housing, that's true. But of course, that doesn't necessarily mean we're overcrowded. It just means that we don't have a necessary supply of various things. But having babies is not really about overpopulation, because what we want is a stable demographic. So we want as many babies to be born as there are 50-year-olds, so that when 50-year-olds reach retirement, the babies have entered the workplace, are paying taxes, are part of the labour market, are helping to care for the elderly. That's about population stability rather than population growth. So the problem we've got at the moment is that we've got a birth gap. So we've got too few babies being born to support the elderly by the time those babies become adults. And this is actually a significant economic threat, because in the 1970s, when we did have enough babies just about to replace those who died, we had 4 working age adults for each pensioner. Now we're now on 3 working age adults for each pensioner, and we'll soon be down to 2. And if you think taxes are high now, if you think there's a shortage of elderly carers for elderly people now, you have seen nothing yet. And that is because the birth rate has fallen so much. Now, other countries in the world are also experiencing this. It's a problem across the West. But in other countries, they're talking about it. Governments are trying to think what they can do about it. Now, I'm not saying they have the answer. Denmark, for example, has got a campaign called Do It for Denmark. Doesn't seem to be working, but at least they're taking the issue seriously. But somehow in Britain, we just don't want to talk about this. We're too squeamish. So I'm really trying to get it on the agenda, talk about what it means for our economy, but perhaps even more importantly, what it means for the 92% of young women who want to become mothers, but for all sorts of different reasons are finding that difficult.
Well, it's interesting that you make that point, Miriam, because I've heard you being interviewed on this topic in the last 24 hours. And what's frustrating is hearing...
Your sound's dropped out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear us? Is there any chance that Miriam can hear us? I hope so. What I was going to say...
Well, you tell us what you heard.
What I was going to say is that when she's been interviewed on this by some BBC presenters, the presumption is that women don't want to have children. But actually what Miriam's at pains to point out is that according to their research, 96%? 92%, thank you, of young women... Hello, Miriam, I think you've come back. I was just pointing out that the myth around this is that women don't want to have babies. They're choosing careers. That's not what the research is proving, is it? 92% of young women want to have at least 2 children, but they're only having 1.2. Why then, Miriam? Why is this happening?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's what we tried to dig into in our poll. So there are various things mentioned. The most popular thing to be mentioned was household finances. So people not earning enough, paying too much tax, housing being too expensive, childcare, all those kind of things. We're talking about the impact on their finances. Just over half mentioned impact on career. That's obviously important. But what was really interesting was that about 3/4 of young women said that Britain's view of motherhood just isn't very good. It didn't seem a very appealing prospect. We don't seem to celebrate motherhood. And if you think about how the media and politicians and the newspapers often talk about motherhood, it's very much drudgery, it's second best, it's not as good as a career, women need to get back into the workplace, how are you going to juggle everything, all these kind of things. It's very negative. And so young women understandably don't think it's appealing. But what was the most
Sorry, Miriam, I just want to push back a little bit on that, because isn't the solution to motherhood not being appealing to make fatherhood more appealing as well, so that we share the responsibility of parenting, which all sorts of research proves that actually dads who can spend more time with their children to share that burden more equally, dads also like that balance.
Well, that's absolutely true. And lack of a suitable partner was, again, one of the most frequent things mentioned by women. But I don't think it's only that. Of course, we want to promote fatherhood, but we also want to promote motherhood and make it seem like something that society values. And unfortunately, I just think too much of the time that's not the message that we hear. But yes, we should be promoting both motherhood and fatherhood. And what I'd love to do next is to do a similar survey of young men and find out young men's attitude, and that would be very revealing. But I think one of the most interesting part of the research, and something that we could fix relatively easily, was about knowledge and awareness of fertility. And 69% of young women thought that it was fine to wait until 35 to start to plan a family. Now, unfortunately, the facts of female fertility make it clear that actually, if you're not a mother by the age of 35, sadly, you've probably only got about a 1 in 4 chance of becoming a mother. Just 2/3 of the women in our survey didn't know that.
Yeah.
And that's something that's potentially easier to fix through education and awareness, although, of course, we've also got to get the barriers out the way. But that was a very surprising result.
Can we ask you, just before we let you go, Miriam, Suella Braverman is being criticised by the Labour Party emergency question in the Commons after she said, in her view, the police at the top are biased in favour of the pro-Palestinian marches. Do you agree with her?
Yes, I do. And I think, there's been a lot of criticism of the police in terms of how they police Black Lives Matter, how they police COVID protests. We know that there are issues with politicisation of the police. And so I think it is fair enough for the Home Secretary to ask whether, if these were pro-Israel and anti-Palestine demonstrations where people were going to be calling for harm to be done to Palestinians, would the police ban them? We don't know. But there does seem to be some two-tier policing going on in this country, and I think she's right to call it out. And also, if you look at the polling, whilst, of course, people are split on this issue, far more people think these protests should be banned on Remembrance Day than don't. So she's expressing a very mainstream view, even if it's distasteful to the Westminster bubble.
OK, brilliant, straightforward, full of common sense, as normal. Miriam Cates, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
So she's always interesting. And now, job on the line, Rishi Sunak has warned Sir Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Chief, he will take the blame if the protests do turn ugly at the weekend.
And Labour chaos, Keir Starmer is fighting to control his party as shadow ministers are rumoured to be set to quit. That and much more after your morning's news.
Bev, thank you very much. 10:32. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Shadow Home Secretary is accusing Suella Braverman of encouraging extremists with comments published in an article for The Times. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davies calling for the Prime Minister to sack Mrs Braverman over her claims. Rishi Sunak met with the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. Yvette Cooper is calling for Suella Braverman to make a statement.
She is deliberately inflaming community tensions in the most dangerous of ways. She is encouraging extremists on all sides, attacking the police when she should be backing them. It is highly irresponsible and dangerous, and no other Home Secretary would ever have done this.
IDF soldiers uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches as they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Some 80 countries and international organisations will meet in Paris later today to discuss ways of getting humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict. The Foreign Secretaries in Saudi Arabia as part of a diplomatic effort to continue to prevent the Middle East crisis spiralling into wider war. He'll hold high-level talks with regional counterparts in efforts to avoid escalation and work towards a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder over the fatal stabbing of 15-year-old Alfie Lewis. Alfie was attacked in the Horsforth area of Leeds on Tuesday afternoon as children were leaving two nearby schools. The 14-year-old will appear in court also charged with possession of a knife. Alfie's family say he was 1 in a million and he had the biggest heart. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2299 and 1.1501 euros. The price of gold, £1,583 and 2 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,402 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Right, still to come, we're going to be joined by our all-star panel of Carol Malone and Sam Lister. Don't go anywhere, some great stories to get through. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa, whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
10:39, you're with Britain's News and GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, Rishi Sunak has warned the Met chief, Mark Rowley, that Rowley or Rowley?
Rowley.
Rowley.
Or hopeless. Why don't we just call him hopeless?
You will take the blame if this weekend's protest turned violent. So let's talk about that now with political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and broadcaster and journalist Carol Malone.
It's on
Morning,
your front
ladies.
page, Sam, with your byline. There it is.
And it will be Mark Rowley, because he'll be having a row on Monday morning if this all goes wrong.
I mean, it's high stakes for the Met chief, because essentially he said that the bar has not been met for the necessary evidence to call this protest to a halt. But Rishi Sunak summoned him into number 10 yesterday. He warned him, if this goes wrong, it's on your head, be it.
If it goes wrong, he should be fired.
Yes, completely.
Yeah, I suspect that wouldn't happen, though.
No,
it doesn't happen anymore, does it? Nobody gets fired anymore.
It doesn't, you know. But I think a lot of people are very, very nervous that this weekend, it really could turn into a very nasty weekend of violence, and that a lot of MPs are actually very fearful themselves of actually attending these ceremonies up and down the country, let alone, obviously, the London one, which is where most of the focus is. So I think people are very, very scared, actually, that this could be a very, very bad weekend.
I wonder how many Jewish people will dare to come into central London, Carol, on Saturday.
Not only Jewish people now, there's stories in the papers that vets, all those elderly poppy sellers, those people who give their time for free and they turn out in all weathers, they are now being intimidated and bullied and abused. But, you know, the thing about Rowley now, I mean, I think he's made this decision on the basis that he's terrified to cancel this march, because he knows that if people march into London anyway, he has a force that will not be able to handle it. I think he's scared of... I don't think the force is up to handling it. Can you remember the last time they had to wade in to protest? I can't. And I think he's terrified of the optics of it, what it looks like, cops wading into a supposed peace march. But the thing that really gets me about all of this, we have a couple of weeks in the year, this week particularly, which ends this weekend, that is devoted to honouring our war dead. And give us that time to do that. You know, this is not about Palestine's war dead this week. It's not about Israel's war dead. It's about our war dead. People who died in the world wars, the people who died in recent wars, you know, in Afghanistan and in Ireland, wherever. And I think it's really shocking. And Rishi actually said, what was Rishi's words? He said, the planned protest offends our heartfelt gratitude to memory of those who gave so much. Because you know what's going to happen if they do attack the cenotaph, if there's any trouble. That Sunday, which is supposed to be, that Saturday and Sunday, which is supposed to be about quiet reflection and thanks, it's going to be all about the protesters trying to damage the cenotaph. And I really resent them taking attention away from our vets. And also, poppy sellers are not going into the streets now at the weekend because they're terrified. So that means the money that the British Legion raises every year, which was 42 million quid last
we're
year.
just showing that picture on Charing Cross Station.
Is this where the one elderly person punched at one of these places?
Look how bewildered the poppy sellers are. If you're listening on the radio, this is Charing Cross Station. They are surrounded, the poppy sellers. They're all elderly. They're completely bewildered. They don't know what's going on, and they can't do it. And then they weren't there. And then they vanished.
And Pierce, funds are going to go down this year. Like I said, last year it was 42 million. I'd be amazed if it's that much this year. Shame on them, because that's to help vets, past and present.
We shouldn't forget as well how many Muslim people died in the Second World War fighting on our side.
Yeah, and this is a commemoration for them, for everybody. And it's such a great shame, as Carol says, that the attention is being taken away from what this weekend should be about. And I think it has the potential to really have long-lasting, damaging impact on this country and relations in this country between different communities, different faiths. I think it's really ill-advised. I think the Met and Downing Street have made it clear that they really want the organisers to call it off. I think we're too far down the line for that.
Yeah, now.
Rowley won't have a shred of credibility left if this all goes wrong. This is the guy who came into this job just over a year ago, saying he was going to change the force, root and branch. He was going to get back to old-fashioned policing. He's not. He's running scared like everyone before him has.
And you talk about when they get involved in marches. Look at how they behaved, the police, when the women were the vigil for Sarah Everard. Appalling. Heavy-handed, clumsy.
Yes.
It was a real low point in the Met Police's history, I think, that, because you have, it's still emblazoned on my mind, that image of these big burly police officers lifting up that very petite girl, and you just think, actually, you know, that really was a memory that kind of stuck in my mind. And then you see, obviously, what's happening with people who are covering their face in masks at these pro-Palestine protests. That is not supposed to happen. They are not supposed to cover their faces. They're not supposed to wear masks, yet they are. And I think, you know, you see that contrast. Obviously, we've had this quite explosive comment piece from Suella Braverman this morning in The Times making these points. That, within the party, has gone down... it's gone down very badly, even among some on the right. There are people who do think she's right to have done what she's done, but there are many on the right of the party who think, well, the sentiments are accurate, the tone and the way she has done it is
again,
not
Sam, you know,
the right thing to do.
Isn't that the problem now with government and the cops? It's all about image. It's all about how it comes across. It's not about sorting out the problem. The problem this weekend is let us honour our war dead, and we're not going to be able to. And as you say, covering their faces means they're intent on causing bother. And the cops haven't, you know, while they've arrested some people who've caused bother at these marches, I'd like to know how many have been charged and how many are going to appear in court, because I'll bet not very many.
And
they don't want to
offend. And I wonder how many were arrested over the language they were using. From the river to the sea, talking about holy war, jihad. We don't know.
Of course, this is what Suella, this is what she says. They are hate-filled marches. And, you know, you have people say, no, they're not that peaceful. I am sure the majority of the people on this march will be peaceful, but there is a minority who is intent on causing trouble, and they will destroy our weekend.
Yeah, and they never talk about, do they, condemning Hamas and give us your hostages. Let's have our hostages back.
And it's very interesting, actually, even that those on the left of the Labour Party, we know the people involved, you know, John McDonnell and that cabal. They always talk about, we don't see violence from any side. It's always both sides this, both sides that, which is just a very weasel way of failing to actually condemn Hamas for the attacks.
How much trouble is Starmer in? Because we've got this motion, the amendment to the King's speech next week. I can't recall that ever happening before, calling for a ceasefire. We've seen one member of the Shadow Cabinet resigning. I think it might have been your paper today saying he would have been sacked if he carried on. Is he in a lot of trouble?
I think at this stage, it's actually not playing too badly for him, because he is, for once, he's
sticking
stuck
to his
position.
guns.
You know, it's a flip-flop, as the Tories like to call him, has actually picked a position and he's stuck to it, and so it makes him look a little bit tough for once. The problem is for him, if it suddenly then escalates and you suddenly get, say, 10 of his front bench quitting on a matter of principle, but then you have to look back at the Corbyn era. I mean, I can't remember. I think it's like 80% of his front bench team quit.
But not Starmer. But not Starmer. He stayed on. He stayed on with that horrible Marxist.
He did.
But it's interesting that the people who were around with Corbyn at that time have been very quiet over the past 2 years since Starmer took over, and suddenly they've reared their ugly heads again because they realise the climate is right. They realise that their vile views are actually going to be listened to currently, and those views they're creating anti-Semitism on our streets, and it scares me. And you're right, if you're Jewish in this city, any city currently, you can't, you know, London would be a no-go area on Saturday.
But do you think it should be banned completely, Carol? I'm just sitting here listening. But do you think it should just be, they shouldn't be allowed to march? Because they will anyway.
Just this weekend.
They will anyway. They'll turn up in their million. They'll turn up. It won't matter if they say they should or shouldn't do it.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why I think they've let it go ahead, because the cops know they can't stop anything. They know they don't have the manpower. Maybe it's even the quality of the cops. I don't know. You know, I don't see cops wading into a so-called peace protest on any level.
But isn't that because we have a Western liberal democracy where the vast majority of people who protest do so peacefully? Like, I thought that was really interesting when Cara said she doesn't remember the last time she's seen them going in with batons, and we're not allowed to use the water cannons, are we, that Boris bought?
Very expensive ones.
Very expensive water cannons. So we have to operate within the rules of this country, Sam, which are that you have the freedom to protest.
I mean, this is actually, there are many within the Conservative Party who say, look, this is what World War II was all about. This is what Rishi Sunak says today.
Winston Churchill's grandson, Nicholas Soames, MP, he was saying the same thing.
I think so. So there is definitely a big strand of the Conservative Party who think, actually, that was what World War II was about. It was about fighting fascism. It was about this country's right, people in this country's right to protest about things that we might not agree with. You know, that is the whole point.
But that's the general rule, though, isn't it? But we're just talking about one weekend.
That's
we're just talking about one time. It's not about history. It's not about our democracy. It's about one weekend of honouring people who died for this country.
I think it's such a shame that the organisers didn't get together and say, actually,
just
when we think about it, we're going to call it off, because we can do it next weekend.
Do it on Friday. Well, they've done it every day since. They're at almost every rail station in the country.
And here's another interesting point. Sarah By made this point in the Mail yesterday. Why do so many women march for taking part in this march? I mean, when you consider what's happened with Hamas, which does not exactly respect women's rights, is it?
No.
It's an organisation that segregates women at home. And yet we've got all these women marching for Palestine, and yet it's Hamas who started this.
Yeah, I mean, I find that personally baffling, because this is not a regime that is tolerant of women or in any way enhances the life of the women that live there. So
women commonly take part in peace marches, though, don't they? Wasn't it you, Carol, who went to see the CND? Were we talking
years ago? Yeah, decades ago.
So they would say that it actually this is no different. There are more women because we feel for the families and the children.
But I think this is different. It's interesting. There was a lady on a show I was doing yesterday, and she said she was a mum, and she was a very reasonable, rational lady, and she said, you know, I'm going on this march on Saturday because I want to teach my kids about genocide. And I said, what about the genocide that happened 80 years ago with the Nazis? And she said, well, yes, that as well. That as well. That's like the most important thing this weekend. So, you know, if you're going to talk about genocide, but a lot of people who are, who are going to protest for Palestine, they're conveniently not mentioning the Hamas October the 7th attack.
I know.
It's like that didn't happen.
And Carol, they've made it quite clear, Hamas, that if there was a ceasefire, they would regroup and they would do another October 7. And they are not releasing the hostages. They haven't released any. Well, they've released about 4.
But you know what do the people on this march expect us to do? We can't call a ceasefire. We can't. We can ask for it, but we can't call it. Do we think Netanyahu's going to listen to us?
I really want to bring this story in because I think it's a really interesting debate. This is about James Bulger. So the family wants to sit in on the parole hearing, and they're not being allowed to, are they, Sam?
No, and you can. I mean, you know, the poor Bulger family. This is. I mean, you know, this has been decades of pain and misery for Denise Ferguson and the family more widely. You think how every time, you know, there is a parole hearing, this brings everything back. It brings back the press attention. Their lives have never been able to really, truly move on from this. Now, Dominic Raab, when he was Justice Secretary, he made this decision to open up parole hearings because they'd always been traditionally very secretive processes. Victims felt very, very frustrated that they had no real ability to take part. So he made this decision to really go into this kind of more public process. But the problem is the parole board itself still has a huge say in who can go in and who can say what, when. And they've decided that the family cannot
And
take
this is
part.
John Venables.
It's the reason that they've given for deciding this is farcical. They've said they've done it to protect the mental health of the killer, John Venables. You know, I covered this trial, and Venables was 10 at the time, I think. And I remember looking at that boy, and I mean, it sounds crazy to say a child was the face of evil, but he was. Robert Thompson, no, but Venables was. And even having served their prison sentence that got out in 2001, Venables has reoffended 4 times, and it's mostly child porn offences. And what Denise Ferguson is saying is she wants the public made aware of what a danger he is to children. Now, you know, in the court case, I remember maybe the public should have been made aware, but the full details of what these boys did to James Bulger were not released on the basis that it was so vile. And maybe if the public knew, they would be much less sympathetic to stuff like, much less accepting of this. Because Venables has been let out, say, 4 separate times and re-jailed 4 times because he's still doing the same stuff, not killing people, but the porn stuff that happened all those years ago. And she just wants people to know, and she has every right to do that.
Yeah, and the other lad, of course, he's completely rebuilt his life completely.
Yeah, completely, and not really
never heard a word from him.
And that is,
Robert Thompson.
And that's how it should be. That is what everybody would hope would happen. But clearly, in this case, it hasn't happened. And I think what is an interesting point that the family make is that actually he knows where they live. He knows who they are.
Yeah.
He knows where their son's grave is.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about him. If he is released, they will never know where he is.
No, he'll be given a secret address, secret and probably a new identity.
Yeah.
Do you know, well, listen, he's had about 4 different
Yes, he
identities
has.
already, and multi-millions have been... You know, I remember the time we were covering this after they were put in jail. Well, they weren't put in jail, they were put in a secure unit. They had quite a nice life in that unit.
Yeah.
Theatre outings, football outings, all this. There was
millions
spent.
We need to move on. We need to move on. Thanks, ladies. Right, still to come, we're going to have a change of tone. M&S has recorded a huge spike in profits.
So
Isn't this great news? Due
Good
to a
for the high
boost
street.
in sales. Is this the return of the high street? We're going to be debating that next. We're GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, it's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. A day of sunshine and showers for many, with a chilly feel in the wind as well. At the moment, there's an area of low pressure just to the northwest of the UK, and that is bringing some brisk winds and also that showery theme to many places. The westerly winds mean it's towards the west where we'll see the heaviest and most frequent showers, some hail, some thunder mixed in. Meanwhile, towards the east, a greater chance of staying dry, but a few showers filtering in here. There will be some sunny breaks around, the best of these across northern parts of Scotland, but it is going to be a chilly feel to things. Highs of around 8 or 9 in the north, 11 or 12 further south. As we go through this evening and overnight, the showers continue, particularly towards the west. Perhaps some longer spells of rain, especially across parts of southwest England. And here, some strong winds to watch out for too. Risk of gales, perhaps even a little bit stronger than that. As we go through the night, there will be some clear skies developing, especially across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some frost is likely here as temperatures dip below freezing. Further south, a touch milder, but a bit of a chilly start first thing on Friday. There'll also be some wet weather around across southern areas, but that will clear away towards the east. Then otherwise, many places having a largely sunny picture, but showers continuing to come in on a northerly wind, so it'll be areas exposed to that wind direction that we're most likely to see the showers as we go through tomorrow afternoon. Temperatures for many down a degree or so compared to today. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks, Alex. Still to come, more on the Home Secretary launching that attack on the Metropolitan Police Chief. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with the People's Channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 9th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, Braverman blasts the Met. The Home Secretary has launched a scathing attack on the Met Police, accusing them of bias and double standards. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has more.
Tory MPs want Suella Braverman to quit. What will Rishi Sunak do? Let's wait and see.
Knife crime epidemic. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murdering Alfie Lewis, who was stabbed near a school in Leeds. What can be done about youth knife crime?
And a good news story, boost in sales. Marks & Spencer's has reported much better than expected profits for the first half of the year. Is this a return to the high street? What has made Marks & Spencer's so successful this year?
And binned by the Beeb, Cara Vorderman, she's off. She's left her BBC radio show, or she was pushed out over the broadcaster's new social media guidelines. Vorderman says she won't be silenced online, but guess what? The BBC's Gary Lineker, he's continuing his political posturing.
You know what I think she might be doing? It's just occurred to me. If she thinks that Labour are going to sweep the board at the next election and we're going to have Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, she's basically sucking up to the Prime Minister, isn't she? Because all of her tweets are anti-Conservative.
Absolutely.
Party.
Does she want a damehood? Or maybe does she want to be Lady Vorderman?
Yep, exactly. What do you think? Are we being way too cynical there? Maybe she's just standing up for what she believes in. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, the very latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Shadow Home Secretary is accusing Suella Braverman of encouraging extremists with comments published in an article for The Times. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davies calling for the Prime Minister to sack Mrs Braverman over her claims. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. Yvette Cooper is calling for Braverman to make a statement.
She is deliberately inflaming community tensions in the most dangerous of ways. She is encouraging extremists on all sides, attacking the police when she should be backing them. It is highly irresponsible and dangerous, and no other Home Secretary would ever have done this.
GB News understands Downing Street signed off on the Home Secretary's comment article in The Times. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has more.
Westminster is reeling from overnight comments from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, saying there is double standards in policing, that football fans are treated differently to supporters of Black Lives Matter and other seen as left-wing movements. Well, I understand that overnight, Number 10 Downing Street did sign off on these remarks from Suella Braverman. So the question today is, does the PM have confidence in his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman? Increasingly, there is tension on the front bench and the back bench about the comments from Suella Braverman. Some say they're in tune with the Tory grassroots, but others on the left of the party are very concerned.
To the Middle East, IDF soldiers uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches when they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Some 80 countries and international organisations will meet in Paris later today to discuss ways of getting humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict, with an additional 163 fatalities in the West Bank. The Foreign Secretary is in Saudi Arabia as part of a diplomatic effort to continue to prevent the Middle East crisis spiralling into wider war. He'll hold high-level talks with regional counterparts, those currently taking place, in efforts to avoid escalation and work towards a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. Back in the UK, a 14-year-old boy has been charged with murder over the fatal stabbing of 15-year-old Alfie Lewis. Alfie was attacked in the Horsforth area of Leeds on Tuesday afternoon as children were leaving two nearby schools. The 14-year-old will appear in court, also charged with possession of a knife. Alfie's family say he was 1 in a million and had the biggest heart. The NHS waiting list in England has hit a record high, with more people facing delays of more than a year and a half. NHS England found the waitlist increased to just over 7.5 million at the end of September. Officials say it's made up of 6.5 million patients, with some waiting for more than one treatment. The overall list is now nearly 3.5 million higher than it was before the COVID pandemic. Dame Priti Patel will give evidence at the COVID inquiry today. The former Home Secretary is likely to face questions about her approach to controlling the border and policing of lockdown rules. Dame Priti lobbied for stricter border controls in the early stages of the pandemic in an attempt to prevent the virus reaching the UK, but she was overruled. An independent inquiry into a Channel crossing tragedy where at least 27 people died has now been launched. The incident happened after an inflatable migrant boat capsized back in November 2021. An investigation will now take place into the circumstances surrounding the deaths, which included a pregnant woman and 3 children. It follows the publication of a report by the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, which found the boat was wholly unsuitable and ill-equipped. And finally, new rules have been unveiled to protect children online, including limiting direct messages and removing them from suggested friends lists. It's part of Ofcom's Code of Practice under the Online Safety Act, which was signed into law a week ago. The largest platforms will be required to put measures in place, including blocking children from being a suggested friend and blocking people outside children's agreed connections from direct messages. It focuses on illegal material such as grooming content, fraud and child sexual abuse. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and now on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It is 11:06. You've been getting in touch at home. Thank you for keeping us company. We do love your emails. You've all been responding to Suella Braverman writing in the Times this morning.
Very powerful piece.
Yeah. And Lorraine has said that Braverman should be prosecuted for hate speech for calling the march a hate march and saying that homeless people living in a tent is a lifestyle choice.
She did. The trouble is with the Home Secretary, in my view, she doesn't nuance her remarks.
No, but I quite like that about her.
I get that. She's like a bull in a china shop. If she'd said, for some homeless people, it's a lifestyle choice,
it would have.
She'd be absolutely right. But I also thought it was tricky to say to charities, you cannot give homeless people tents. They're charities. They obviously worked out that that's a good thing. But equally, I don't want to see rows and rows of tents in our major cities like you get in New York and LA. Horrible.
Yeah. You see them in London now. You see them on the screen when I drive in every morning. But you see, David has said, why should Suella Braverman be remanded for telling the truth? That is the point. Stephen says she is spot on. The police do police lefty protests completely differently. And Sean in Dover has said, I'm not sure if I heard it from your show, but I'd be cautious of branding any Tory politicians as popular. I think she is.
Yeah.
She is quite popular with the base, the Conservative base.
She certainly is, and they do a Conservative Home, which is the Bible of the Tory party. They do a league table of the most popular ministers, and she's way up the top.
Yeah.
And Rishi is down at about number 23.
Well, is that right?
Yeah.
23?
Yeah. Out of about 28.
Whoa.
And he's the Prime Minister.
About Carol Vorderman losing a job because she refused to be silenced on social media. What she would say was calling out political corruption in the Conservative Party. Jonna says, I'm appalled that Carol Vorderman has been sacked by the BBC. It's the BBC's loss if she gets something better in the long run.
But does John, do you really think it's right for a BBC presenter to be so partial, so vituperative about one political party? Aren't there criticisms she could have made about the Labour Party and Lib Dems? If she did that, it might be more even-handed. But Bev and I are going to take a bet. Will she emerge in the House of Lords under Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government if they win the general election?
That's what she's doing.
We think she might.
She's positioning. She's very good at equations, isn't she?
Good at maths.
And she's made the equation that if she gets herself, you know, kind of winning favour with the Labour Party right now by absolutely obliterating the Conservatives, then if they get into number 10, then she'll be probably one of the first people through that door to advise Rishi Sunak on more than just
Keir
the maths.
Starmer.
Did I say? Yeah, Keir Starmer. Sorry.
And, of course, she used to be David Cameron's maths czar. Stupid gimmick.
Do you know why I think I fell over that? I find it hard to picture Keir Starmer going into number 10.
We'll get used to it, because he will.
Do you find it hard to picture? I'm just not sure he's owning that. He's not owning that image, is he, at the moment?
There's a serious lack of political leadership in this country, in my view. Now, we're talking about the Home Secretary. Let's talk to our political editor, Chris Hope, who's in Westminster. Chris, some Tory MPs simply don't like what she said. Predictably, the Labour Shadow Home Secretary's stuck the boot in. She would, wouldn't she? But what's really going on behind the scenes in the Tory party? Braverman.
Well, it's exposing the divisions privately in the party that you're seeing out there. Of course, the Liberal Democrats say fire Braverman now. No surprise there. You've got Yvette Cooper ordering an urgent question for the Home Secretary, who couldn't turn up today in House of Commons because she's got a family illness she's dealing with. Yet again, I think the issue of nuance, Andrew, is exactly right with Suella Braverman. She understands the base of the Tory party, that kind of right-wing group of politically active, engaged people. She gets them, but I think she sometimes goes a bit too far. I think for a lot of people, mentioning Ulster, Northern Ireland marches, equating the marches to the issues in Northern Ireland was the step too far. The question for Rishi Sunak is, did he know about these comments in advance? Now, Ms Braverman's team, or people close to her, tell me that this document, the article was sent overnight to the PM, and then it came back. There were reports right now that the PM, his team, asked for changes, and they weren't made by Suella Braverman. So I think there's a very important meeting coming up at 11:30, the lobby meeting shortly. The issue of confidence in Suella Braverman, that'll be asked. That'll be the first question they ask of the spokesman. Does the PM have confidence in Suella Braverman? It does seem very interesting. I mean, lots of ministers giving me their views, ex-ministers over in the House of Commons. One saying it's like a minister undermining a general 48 hours before battle on the battlefield. But someone else said, no, she's not looking to be sacked. She's merely his view. She wants to make it clear. But what's interesting, of course, is she's not an observer to this. She is one of the bosses to Mark Rowley, the other being London Mayor. She can do something about this if she wants to. So it's certainly caused a cat amongst the pigeons here in Westminster. And there are question marks about whether she'll survive the day. Will she survive into the weekend? And, of course, on that weekend, Mark Rowley, it's been very clear from the PM, if there's any trouble at the end of these marches, if it cuts across marking Remembrance Day, then it'll be him to answer for those problems.
But if Number 10 signed the article off, Chris, why could they? On what basis could they fire her?
Well, it's the issue of signing off, Andrew. So, from the Home Secretary's team, the article went to Number 10. We're hearing this morning, I'm trying to get it stood up by Number 10, that changes were made and they were not adopted by the Home Secretary. Now, we don't know if that's the case yet. We're finding out for GB News viewers. If that's the case, it means that she said she wouldn't make the changes asked of her by Number 10, and that is a problem. We'll find out shortly if that's the case. OK, brilliant.
Christopher Hope there. If only his political expertise was matched by his expertise in ties. Will you have a word with him? Now, from Christopher Hope. It's a very stylish man. Liam Halligan is in the studio. Right, Marks and Spencer's. Oh, I love a good news story, Liam.
It is a good news story, but I'm going to ever so slightly caveat it, I'm afraid, because in the end, facts matter. Now, M&S and WH Smith, two flagship high street titans, they've had a really good few months, despite the fact there's a cost of living crisis. And let me just take you through some of the figures. If we look at M&S's latest results, over the last 6 months, their profits are up 56%.
That's humongous.
To £326 million. That's a big number. And understandably, the CEO, Stuart Machin, there has been a revamp going on at M&S, says spirits are high for Christmas. And chapeau to them. What a fabulous British company. WH Smith as well, their annual profits are up 96% to £143 million. That's annual, not 6 months. But be clear here, it's their travel stores at airports and train stations that have really outperformed. Their high street stores are actually slightly off over the last year. And this is the point I wanted to make to both of you. There will be lots of headlines, M&S doing well, WH Smith doing well. But the broader picture across the high street is a lot more gloomy, I'm afraid. And let's have a look at some numbers, which actually came out yesterday, but they're worth highlighting. These are from the British Retail Consortium across the whole of the UK high street. Retail sales up 2.5% in October. That's slower than the growth in September, these compared to the same month in the previous year. That's below the 4.2% annual increase in each of the last 12 months on average, so you can see the growth is slowing down. And here's the kicker. These are nominal numbers, right? These are numbers before inflation. When you consider that inflation is 6.7%, the value of retail sales in real terms has been falling over the last year, and it's now falling at an accelerating pace. I don't say this to be gloomy. I just think that GB News viewers and listeners want to know how it is.
And it's the old problem about the high street, Liam. All sorts of factors. The government are going to do all sorts of things they say to stimulate the high street. They never do. Why can't they just make sure parking charges, for instance, are cut? Wouldn't that help a lot?
Britain's high streets, particularly in our towns, in our cities as well, but particularly in our towns, are suffering systemically from the big online retailers, from what we call business rates, which are taxes that physical shops have to pay, which online retailers don't have to pay before they make any money at all. Before they take any money at all, they have to pay those taxes on their premises. But on top of that, we've still got a lot of people suffering in this economy. We've had 14 successive interest rate rises. If you've got a mortgage or other personal loans, you may be paying more. We've got a lot of concern about, you know, energy bills. They could spike again this winter. The public knows it. They're often ahead of the media and political class, of course. So people are reining in their horns. Now, WH Smith, M&S, particularly WH Smith at airports, it's a bit more upmarket, right? It's a bit more upmarket. But for a lot of ordinary folk here across the country, they are not feeling good about this Christmas. There is a bit of, you know, gloom and doom on the high street.
So the fact that these shops, Smiths and Marks and Spencers, are in travel venues, and we've had this increase, is this because people are actually this year have travelled more, even like post-pandemic 2022, people still weren't travelling that much?
It's because, yeah, a lot of people are travelling more now. Obviously, well-heeled families travel a lot, but also, you know, less well-heeled families, they're thinking, well, it's gloomy in Britain, we're going to have a good holiday, and when you go on your holiday, you're going to spend money in the shops.
Yeah.
You know, your holiday starts when you get to the airport for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And that's why Smiths in travel venues, whether it's trains or airports, is doing quite well. That's why WH Smith is doing quite well, because it is generally more of an upmarket place. But those British Retail Consortium figures show across the high street, it's not plain sailing.
I always buy a book at WH Smith's at the airport, wherever I'm going.
It's a ritual.
Retro.
Yeah,
but it's
I
wonderful.
always do.
Yeah,
I always do.
Because you're saying to yourself, oh, you know, the likes of us, we read all day, every day, right? We read news. I feel guilty when I read fiction unless I'm on holiday, right? Because you think it should be some boring economics report. I should be,
I know, and you get
pretending to read your column, Andrew.
You know how to hurt a boy. We want to talk about Lidl as well.
Yeah.
What's this? Staff are wearing body cams.
Well, this is interesting. We've all read and heard, and I've been talking to lots of people in my local town about it. There's a lot of shoplifting going on, and this often happens when the economy turns down. People get desperate, and staff in Lidl, one of our main discounters, which taken a lot more market share during this cost of living crisis, it's, you know, Lidl and Aldi between them have been nipping at the heels of the likes of Tesco and Sainsbury, because they are discounters and people want value for money, lots of people, in the cost of living crisis. But at the same time, they are more likely to suffer from shoplifting because of the demographic of the people that tends to go there. So staff in Lidl have taken to wearing body cams in order to try and detect shoplifting, and also in case they have to confront somebody with shoplifting, in case there's going to be some kind of, legal case. I mean, it's unreal.
Oh, I hate this.
You're on, I'm sure little Aldi.
You cap someone with someone's hand in the till, and they're worried about legal action.
I'm sure Lidl pay their staff well. They have actually got a good reputation as an employer, it must be said, and I'm sure they're doing this mainly to protect their staff, because if somebody's caught shoplifting, they may think twice about kicking off if it's being filmed, right?
Yeah. They won't.
I think that's clear.
They just won't.
But these men and women,
people who they consider themselves to be desperate. They're only going to more likely assault the shop worker wearing the camera to push them down on the ground so they can't see it. And this shoplifting thing, Liam, this has got to be partly because of self-service checkouts. That has got to be, because you see it all the time. I see people. I saw somebody the other day do a bag of shopping, and then kind of was dealing with the kids, and the partner was there, and she went, "Oh, just take that," and he went, and then she sort of cancelled it, and she started again. I thought they've just nicked the whole bag of shopping.
How can they keep their eye on it all the whole time they can't?
Two things. Yes, shoplifting is closely related to an economic downturn. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There will be people shoplifting, particularly single mums you talk to and read about a lot. They're just desperate to feed their kids, and they're scared, and they're financially insecure. And I'm not condoning that for a second, but I'm just saying there's a relationship there. But then there's also people who shoplift because they like the thrill of it.
Yeah.
It's almost a cliche. Well-heeled people who are very wealthy who get shoplifting convictions because they want some kind of kick in their life. I think that's worth saying. I also think it's worth saying that I'm not saying this is all doom and gloom, right? The High Street is doing better than this time last year, as M&S and WH Smith show. But I think what we're seeing is a real a separation between people who are better off, who think that the downturn is over, and then they can get on with their normal lifestyle, and a lot of the rest of the population who feel that the downturn is still very much with us.
When I was in my sixth form doing my job, Friday night, Saturday night job at Sainsbury's, there were store detectives, and we knew who they were, and we'd get them, or we'd have to go sprinting after somebody who'd been pinching. Do they still employ store detectives, or is that gone with the arc?
No, they do. And I guess supermarkets in general have made the calculation that they save on checkout staff with these self-checkout things, Bev, but they're going to lose more when it comes to shoplifting. But the problem is, if I take an item and put it in my basket, right, and I don't check it, you don't know that shoplifting's taken place. I mean, it's difficult to measure these things when they circumvent the system.
Right? They must know that shoplifting's taken place, because when they're doing a stock check and they've had X come in and they've had X amount of produce go out, there'll be a discrepancy. But you mean they don't see it?
It's undetected. It's completely undetected.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you, Liam. Right,
I always go to the till.
I do. Use people, human beings.
Exactly.
I like human beings.
I don't want to put people out of a job.
Still to come, there's been a 19% increase in the number of knife offences since last year. 15-year-old Alfie Lewis is the latest victim of this horrendous crime, stabbed on Tuesday near a school in Leeds. How do we stop this epidemic? We're going to be discussing that. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Well, terrible news. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with the murder over the fatal stabbing of Alfie Lewis in Leeds. Alfie was 15.
That's right. Fatal stabbings in England and Wales are at the highest level since records began, with 282 homicides committed using a knife or sharp instrument last year.
Like with Alfie Lewis, many of the victims and perpetrators are too young to drink or drive, yet somehow they acquire and feel the need to carry knives.
So how can we stop this knife crime epidemic? Joining us to discuss what can be done is the chair of Haringey Communities Against Violence, Ken Hines. Ken, good to see you. Thank you for bringing your expertise, experience and insight to this topic for us. In your experience, first of all, why are predominantly young boys carrying knives?
They use the false pretense. For example, they use the false pretense of thinking that by carrying a knife, I'm getting some feedback on.
Okay, we can hear you, Ken.
Okay, just to say, to start again, young people sometimes think that they need to carry a knife to safeguard themselves. Now, that's a false premise for them to have. Now, but basically, there's no excuse for people carrying knives. What I find quite clearly is that people are suffering from trauma, emotional trauma. Now, if they don't check in with how their emotional well-being as to where they are with themselves, if they've lacked self-esteem, confidence, then they generally will want to take on, to carry a knife. My thing is simply this. The school should be aware of some of these youngsters that are struggling with their emotional well-being. And in doing so, they should be stepping in to allow people like myself and other groups, grassroots groups, to come in and to help kind of mentor those young people to deal with that trauma more effectively.
So what you're describing there, Ken, really are young people who are scared, fundamentally, when I ask why they're carrying knives. And they're scared, they lack confidence, they feel vulnerable on the streets. But that doesn't explain the aggression that then leads to attacks. Where's that coming from?
Well, if a person feels, a young person feels violated, they're going to feel that they're going to have to step up and do something about it. Now, you also got the social media influences and some music that actually says that what they will do if they got violated, and they often feel that they have to go savage on the people who's been violating them. Now, to me, they don't think about consequences. They just think about getting revenge. But personally, I think that we've got to stop looking at the symptoms and start looking at the causes. Now, if we can't get into schools and deal with young people at a lot earlier age, I'm talking about in primary school, I'm talking about in nursery, we need to have programs about emotional well-being. So, and to how to tackle the rage or the red mist that sometimes come to us. As adults, we check in and we deal with it. We deal with it more effectively.
Ideally, we do. Not all adults do, admittedly. But I think I recognise what you're describing: thin-skinned young boys, easily offended, think they've got a right to perpetrate some sort of justice on an experience that they perceive as a slight. But where is the sense of what is right and what is wrong? Because throughout history, we've had kids who didn't have great self-esteem, but they didn't take a knife because they were fearful of what? The consequences of authority, of teachers, of the police. That's all disappeared, Ken.
Yes, it has. And since we stop parents from disciplining children, our own children, it means that the children are now dominant in some homes because they know that if even a parent talk out of hand to a child, they can call up Childline or go back into the school and report that, and that parent could get into a problem, right? And if God help a parent who put their hands on their child, which in some cases, by doing it early, may prevent them having to put their hand on the child later down the line and have that child in check. At the moment, the child has got a lot of
power and freedom.
Laws that protect, power, but we haven't taught them about responsibility to go with that power. And until we get some sort of balance, this is not just in London. Look, this happened in Leeds. This happens all around the country, and it's unacceptable that we're thinking that we can arrest our way out of this. We can't, and we shouldn't be excluding kids either. We should be working within schools to get a better results from them.
OK, thank you, Ken. Really interesting. Ken Hind there, who does work with young people, the chair of Haringey Communities Against Violence.
Often there's an absence of a father figure in some of these homes too.
Often there is, and
they get sucked into gangs.
And as we were hearing then, and parents don't feel they can discipline their kids anymore. So what a mess.
Terrible.
Right, BBC. Carol Vorderman leaves BBC Radio show over anti-government social media posts.
Is she on her way to the House of Lords under a Labour government? We think she might be. Overstated minority. The size of the transgender population may have been overstated by official figures because people didn't understand what the census was asking. That is a very, very amusing, but in some ways, very serious story.
It is.
So stay with us.
Right, don't go anywhere. It's your morning's news with Tatiana.
Bev, thank you and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Shadow Home Secretary is accusing Suella Braverman of encouraging extremists with comments published in an article for The Times. In the piece, the Home Secretary says the Metropolitan Police is guilty of double standards for allowing pro-Palestinian rallies to go ahead on Armistice Day. Liberal Democrats leader Sarah Davey is calling for the Prime Minister to sack Mrs Braverman over her claims. Rishi Sunak met the police commissioner yesterday, saying he would hold Sir Mark Rowley accountable. Yvette Cooper is calling for Braverman to make a statement.
She is deliberately inflaming community tensions in the most dangerous of ways. She is encouraging extremists on all sides, attacking the police when she should be backing them. It is highly irresponsible and dangerous, and no other Home Secretary would ever have done this.
IDF soldiers uncovered tunnel shafts and seized weapon caches when they took control of a Hamas outpost in northern Gaza. They say it took 10 hours of fighting to take control of the military stronghold in western Jabalia. Some 80 countries and international organisations will meet in Paris later today to discuss ways of getting humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Health authorities from both the Palestinian and Israeli sides claim over 12,000 people have died in the conflict. The NHS waiting list in England has hit a record high, with more people facing delays of more than a year and a half. NHS England found the waitlist increased to just over 7.5 million at the end of September. Officials say it's made up of 6.5 million patients, with some waiting for more than one treatment. The overall list is now nearly 3.5 million higher than it was pre-COVID pandemic. And some breaking news to bring you. The Supreme Court is set to give its decision on whether government plans to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda is lawful. Last month, the Home Office challenged a Court of Appeal ruling from June that the deal, which would see asylum seekers deported to the East African nation, was unlawful. The decision on the challenge is expected to be made on Wednesday. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2270 and €1.1483. The price of gold, £1,586.62 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,418 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come, Carol Vorderman has quit. Actually, I think she was pushed from a weekly BBC Radio Welsh show after the BBC updated its social media guidelines. It's because she was so vile about the Tories. So how comes Gary Lineker's still there, posturing away politically? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
$10.39, you were
11:39.
11:39.
He always wishes he
always
had
get
an
it mixed
extra
up.
hour with me, that's what it is.
No, it's because I had Cara Malone whittering in my ear, as you always do. Whittering in my ear, Cara Malone. It's 11:39, and we're talking about Cara Vorderman. Was she pushed? Was she shoved? I hope she was shoved.
Right, we are going to talk to somebody about this because she's left Radio Wales. She says she will not be silenced
she was there?
by the corporation.
Who knew?
And recently, the BBC updated its social media guidelines in an attempt to stop high-profile presenters expressing strong views on party politics.
Well, she's been very critical of the government and the Tories, and we're going to have a look at a couple. So, she says about Johnny Mercer, who is the Veterans Minister. Johnny Mercer and his wife are the most petulant, childish pair of the week. A minister tweeting out emojis, not knowing basic polling political facts. Now he's switched off replies on Twitter. That's pretty personal, isn't it?
It's very personal. She also
He's also
said,
a nice bloke, Johnny Mercer.
She also
actually
said the Tory government has now lost around half of those who voted for them in 2019. Why? Because they're a lying bunch of greedy, corrupt, destructive, hateful, divisive, gaslighting crooks. No need for a focus group on Sunak. It'll just tell you the same. So we're joined now. Our guests are waiting to wade in on this. We're going to speak to former BBC broadcaster Sally Jones. Good morning, Sally. Great to see you again. Do you think the BBC should impose these sort of gagging restrictions on the presenters?
Yes, I absolutely do, because when I was working for the BBC, there were considerably more stringent regulations. I mean, I was for a while staff and then freelance. Either way, there were really stringent regulations. We were not allowed to put our own point of view or start, shouting the odds on politics, etc. The rise in social media has obviously proved a great invitation to people like Carol Vorderman and Gary Lineker. And I really think that, of course, they shouldn't be putting their own points of view. It's rather like Emily Maitlis suddenly having a rant against the Tories when she was supposed to be an even-handed presenter, interviewing people rather than giving her own point of view. It's utterly inappropriate. They're dead right. I think the difficulty is that you get somebody like Gary Lineker. Right. He knows he's almost invulnerable. They literally, he's got so much power, they can't get rid of him. And it's amazing to me how people...
Sally, they can get rid of him. They're in charge. Why should he be able to call the shots just because he talks about some boring football matches every Saturday?
I think the problem is he's far, far higher profile. He's far, far more important to the BBC.
But why?
Radio Wales, of course, is, it's a great place, but it doesn't pull anything like the viewers. Gary Lineker has got the entire might of Match of the Day, Football Focus. All their presenters behind him, as we saw last time they tried to...
Yeah.
And they immediately walked off. Nobody was going to broadcast. Everybody else would have been scared to step into the shoes because they'd been cancelled from here to Kingdom Come. So, they're going to have problems with Gary. If he cares to go on broadcasting, they could be, as they were before, in an incredibly difficult position.
Well, they should have called his bluff.
Well, thank you, Sally, former BBC broadcaster Sally Jones there. Now,
These two are champing at the bit here. Malone.
Before we go there, we just wanted... Well, let me show you what Carol Vorderman said yesterday before we go to Carol and Sam. She said... The BBC recently introduced new social media guidelines, which I respect. However, despite my show being light-hearted with no political content, it was explained to me that, as it is a weekly show in my name, the new guidelines would apply to all and any content that I post all year round.
Since those non-negotiable changes to my radio contract were made, I've ultimately found that I'm not prepared to lose my voice on social media, change who I am, or lose the ability to express the strong beliefs I hold about the political turmoil this country finds itself in.
Fascinating, Carol Malone. What do you make of it?
You know the joke about all this? I remember the time when Carol Vorderman was a Tory.
She was.
And she was one of David Cameron's best friends. She even got a job from David Cameron
at one point. She was the maths czar.
Which is a bit of a joke in itself, because she's got a third in engineering from Cambridge College. But anyway, that's by the by. You know what makes me very sad about this? You know, she really considers herself to be a serious political commentator. She really believes that she is. I mean, that lofty quote there, I won't lose the ability to express the strong beliefs I hold about the political turmoil. You know, what she really needs to look in the mirror and realise that when she has these rants, the unhinged one that Bev just read out there about the lying bunch of greedy, corrupt, destructive... I mean, there's about 3 slander suits in that alone. She really needs to look at how people are viewing her beliefs, and they're laughing at her. But we're looking at her and going, what the hell happened to you? What are you on?
That's exactly what a lot of people are saying.
Because she wasn't like this before. You know what I think? I've got a theory about what's happened to her. I think she hit 60, and she wanted her legacy to be a little bit more serious than countdown host and awards presenter, and so went political, like crazily, madly, hysterically political. And but what upsets me about it, she's quite cruel to people, I think. I mean, look at some of her social media posts. She's cruel. She was cruel to Felicity Mercer, who in the end called her a celebrity attack dog. And I think that's what she's become. She's become an attack dog, and not a very pretty one.
Is she after a peerage from Keir Starmer?
I don't think she would get one.
No.
You don't?
Oh, I think she's on manoeuvres, don't you?
I think, is she the face of the party that he wants? I don't know, maybe she is.
She's popular obviously, with the things that she's saying in terms of a left-wing audience. They're loving her at the moment.
I think, and I've got a slightly different theory to Carol as to why Carol Vorderman is doing this, and I think it is because she's trying to make herself relevant.
Yes.
And, I mean, what does she actually do? I mean, none of us...
A weekly show on Radio Wales, which nobody knew about.
None of us knew that she even had this show. So what does she actually do most days? What is she famous for now? This is the only thing she's famous for. She's trying to use social media to make herself relevant and keep herself in the headlines.
She has maths books that children use in school, so she's still got the legacy of the countdown.
But she has no television profile,
No, she has no,
which will hurt.
This is a way to make her in the papers every day, get her name out there, try and earn her some money, I guess. But I think it's a real sad demise for somebody who actually was a bit of a national treasure.
She was.
People loved Countdown. She was great on it, and it just seems that she's gone down this, as you said,
Sam,
a very nasty, vitriolic route.
What you've just said there is what I was trying to say. I obviously did it very badly. The relatives is exactly what I was trying to say.
Nothing unusual there.
But what really hacks me off, it's not the money she's doing it for, because she's a super rich woman. This is a woman who flies her own plane. And it really hacks me off when people like her start talking about the poor.
Yeah.
You know, she says, I was poor once. We were all poor. I mean, everyone at this table has grown up not in a rich family, not even in a middle-class family.
True.
So, I mean, I just don't buy that tosh from people like her. But she sits there, you know, flying her plane every other weekend and doing whatever, and talking about the poor like she knows. She doesn't. She's a very rich woman. And Sam is exactly right, the relevant, which is what I was trying to say, failed miserably. But I think she's destroying the reputation that she had.
Is she causing any harm for the Conservatives? There's the question that I think. Does she have any power with what she says?
No.
Because this is the problem with social media, isn't it?
Yeah.
You absolutely are endorsed by the people who agree with you.
Tribe,
and the people who don't agree with you ignore you.
But she's also gone over the top.
Yeah.
That's the point.
And social media, she's already had to apologise to an MP anyway.
Yes, she has. The Tory party chair.
Now, can we do this story? I mean, this shouldn't be entertaining. It's not funny. It has a serious element to it, but we couldn't help but snigger when we read this, Carol. Just explain to us what's happened with the Office of National Statistics.
So if you read the papers every day, you'd think predict that every second person in Britain was transgender.
Yeah, you would.
And when the Office of National Statistics did their this census survey, you would also say that the results of that would suggest every third person in the country was transgender. It turns out it's not at all. They've completely overestimated the figures. And why? Because the people who are doing the census didn't understand the question. A lot of them who filled this census in were non-English people. And so didn't know actually what they were writing and saying, and just said they happened to be transgender. Which,
and they said yes.
They said yes. And the ONS is trying to make the excuse here that it's a lot of people coming in from, a lot of migrants coming from various parts of the world. But, you know, this is just a tosh, badly done. You know, the ONS
The ONS get everything wrong.
Form. I was just going to say they've got form for it.
So the question, Sam, that was on the form, is the gender you identify with the same as your sex registered at birth? I mean, you have to, even we speak very good English, and we have to even stop. What does that actually mean?
So we wouldn't have a clue what.
Of the 262,000 people who said no.
Well, I would just say I'm not answering it.
Yeah, but that's so they found out then that if you didn't speak English not well or not at all, you were more likely to be counted as transgender. So in other words, people didn't understand the question, and therefore we have overestimated how many people in this country are transgender.
And also, I think they had to do a similar thing with the number of people who are pansexual, which means people who don't know, which means you are...
Any port in a storm.
What is a very good way. And one of the stats here was 1 in every 67 Muslims is transgender.
No.
Really?
1 in every 67?
1 in every 67...
I've never seen one.
No, Sam and I were saying, have you ever met a transgender?
We're laughing, but actually, but it's a joke, isn't it?
And actually,
it is a serious
issue.
issue.
Make a serious point, which is the Office for National Statistics has a lot of questions to answer on this, because actually, when they were writing this census, they were actually there was a legal challenge by a women's rights group over the actual position anyway, because they were allowing men who self-identify as women, i.e. they haven't had any kind of operation, they haven't got a legal certificate saying they've changed gender, so any man who wants to say they're a woman, that's what the census was going to allow. And so women's groups have to go to court to say,
that's right.
Look, this is ludicrous. So the Office for National Statistics have got this wrong on so many occasions.
The most interesting fact of all, you know who helped shape the question on the census? Guess who? It was the LGBTQ plus lobby.
Yeah. Well, don't look at me.
Not
me.
But you feel like people who
I don't agree with any of this nonsense.
People who work in that area, they assume so much understanding on the part of everybody else. To phrase a question like this, and you think, I know you're obsessed with this issue, but most of us aren't.
It's like they're speaking a foreign language, another dialect.
Adults whose main language was not English made up only 10% of the overall population, but 30% of the transgender population.
It's a joke,
I think we've found a flaw. I think it's
changing all the laws, because apparently we have so many
I know.
It's like satire, isn't it?
We
shouldn't. Satire.
We're laughing, but it isn't funny.
Well, it's not funny. No, it makes me very angry.
Because it's serious.
But it's funny, the mess that they're... And the Office of National Statistics will not hold their hands up and
they
say
get
it's got
all the economic predictions wrong.
Can we just finish on how much we love Marks and Spencer's, please? So they have restored dividend as half-year profits have surged to 75%. Sam, as Liam Halligan said, there is a bit of nuance to this, because predominantly it's the M&S stores that are in train stations where people are travelling around. But I'd rather it was this than the profits had gone down.
Absolutely, and I think it's mainly the food, everyone seems to love the food. I love the food. It's great, nice treat. But I mean, they do admit that they've still got quite a long way to go with the clothes, which can be a little bit...
Interesting that the guy...
making strides.
I know a lot of men who buy their suits in M&S.
I did. The suits are better than the women's clothes. But the guy who's taken it up is this guy called Stuart Matron, is it? Who he used to be a shelf stacker in Sainsbury's, and he's got the touch. And it's, you know, it's anyone who hasn't seen that catalogue, their food catalogue, the Christmas one. Have you been through?
You can't look at it without salivating.
I take it to bed at night and I look at all that can't have.
Most people take their partner. Cara Malone takes a food catalogue.
Because I think, I'm waiting till...
And can we just have one last line on the I'm a Celebrity lineup rumours? The Sun have released the rumoured lineup, including Frankie Dettori, Josie Gibson, love Josie.
Why would Frankie Dettori go in there?
And possibly GB News' Nigel Farage. Would that be a good idea for Nigel Farage to go in,
I think he would absolutely love it, wouldn't it?
He's going in. I'm laying money on it. The Mail said last week he's being been offered £1.5 million.
Is that, I heard $1 million, 1.5.
No, 1.5 million. Wouldn't you go in for that, Malone? You'd go in for £5.
I'd go in for less.
Yeah, well, no, you would. We know that.
I'm surprised you haven't been in already.
Well,
You'd go in for a Marks and Spencer Christmas hamper.
No, but I've done, well, you're not wrong. I've done the other one, what's it called? Big Brother, which was good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's safe, but I think the I'm a Celebrity one, you are very much more exposed in the sense that you have to show your mettle properly.
Yeah.
You have to eat...
I'd be screaming like a man should.
Very funny animals' testicles and things.
I mean, this is the thing, like, if Nigel goes in, he's going to have to show that he's, you know, a man of steel.
Man of the people, yeah.
He can't be wimping out on any of these challenges.
But look, if Matt Hancock can come third,
exactly.
Nigel can win.
Nigel's on a popularity trajectory at the moment, going up. Let's hope it doesn't change.
And all the rest of the people in there as well, who are they? I mean, you read the ones out, I knew, but the rest.
We've got to move on, ladies. Thank you so much. Brilliant, as always. Up next is GB News Live with Pip Thompson and Tom Harwood. What have you got on the show today, guys?
A fracture at the heart of government. Just who signed off on the Home Secretary's article in The Times? Allies of the Home Secretary are implying that Number 10 did give its consent, but there's reason to think that Number 10 might now disagree. We're going to get to the bottom of the truth of what could be a rift at the core of the Cabinet.
We'll also be asking whether the Home Secretary is on a mission to get herself sacked. We'll be returning to the COVID inquiry where a former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is due to give evidence. Plus, a bit of a question for you. If you're a mum, would you pay £230 for a baby perfume? Dior have just launched one. We'd love to know what you think.
And that's not a perfume that smells like babies. It's a perfume for your baby that hopefully smells like something else.
Fascinating. I think the answer here is no. No.
Babies smell lovely with wine.
Oh, honestly, it's the end of days. It's the death of society as we know it, I think, in that very moment.
And it's the end of our show. We'll be back with you on Britain's Newsroom on Monday at 9:30. See you then.
See you then.
Hello again, it's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. A day of sunshine and showers for many, with a chilly feel in the wind as well. At the moment, there's an area of low pressure just to the northwest of the UK, and that is bringing some brisk winds and also that showery theme to many places. The westerly winds mean it's towards the west where we'll see the heaviest and most frequent showers, some hail, some thunder mixed in. Meanwhile, towards the east, a greater chance of staying dry, but a few showers filtering in here. There will be some sunny breaks around, the best of these across northern parts of Scotland, but it is going to be a chilly feel to things. Highs of around 8 or 9 in the north, 11 or 12 further south. As we go through this evening and overnight, the showers continue, particularly towards the west. Perhaps some longer spells of rain, especially across parts of southwest England. And here, some strong winds to watch out for too. Risk of gales, perhaps even a little bit stronger than that. As we go through the night, there will be some clear skies developing, especially across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some frost is likely here as temperatures dip below freezing. Further south, a touch milder, but a bit of a chilly start first thing on Friday. There'll also be some wet weather around across southern areas, but that will clear away towards the east. Then otherwise, many places having a largely sunny picture, but showers continuing to come in on a northerly wind, so it'll be areas exposed to that wind direction that we're most likely to see the showers as we go through tomorrow afternoon. Temperatures for many down a degree or so compared to today. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon.